not meet in the month of February, and our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 5th.
Thank you. Curriculum, Mrs. Cohen?
The curriculum committee also did not meet in February, and our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 4th. I believe the 4th is a Monday.
Okay. Facilities, Mr. Kraus?
Thank you. The Facilities Committee did meet earlier this evening, and we have 4 items from the obsolete items, and I'll make that in the form of a motion to obsolete items A through C.
I'll second.
Questions or comments from board members? Seeing none? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you. And the next Facilities Committee meeting is scheduled for March 12th.
Thank you. Okay, next is the Finance Committee. We have the approval of contracts. Does anyone need anything voted on separately? Okay. Then I'll make a motion to approve contracts A through L. All questions or comments from board members? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Okay, next is the approval of the Bucks County Intermediate Unit 2019-2020 budget. Actually, I'll make a motion to approve the Bucks County Intermediate Unit's 2019-2020 programs and services and instructional materials and research services budget.
A second.
Okay. Questions or comments from board members? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 8-0. I'll make a motion to approve the 2019-2020 advertising of bids and RFPs A through H.
Second.
Questions or comments from board members? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Make a motion to approve the proposal for engineering, project design, development, and construction administration.
Second.
Questions or comments from board members? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. The next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for March 12th, 2019. And the next is the Bucks County Intermediate Unit Committee report. The Bucks County Intermediate Unit launched the Ambassador Academy initiative in the fall of 2016. The purpose of the Ambassador Academy is to enhance the leadership abilities of a diverse group of Bucks County Intermediate staff members through the exploration of effective communication strategies and helpful tools that support professional growth. Members participated in 5 monthly sessions focused on the following topics: all about the IU, presentation skills, difficult conversations, body language, and emotional intelligence. These topics were used for small group presentations for board members at the last meeting, so we could see how these topics affect communication with others. The Bucks County Intermediate Unit is also the first school district or service agency in the country to receive meritorious budget awards from the Association of School Business Officials International for 25 consecutive years in a row. So the first one ever to get it for 25 years in a row. This award demonstrates the highest standards of budgeting, transparency, process, and best practices. It's a great testament to the exceptional work of the Bucks County Intermediate Unit's business staff. And just a couple of other things. Dr. Deb Locke, the Director of Early Childhood Programs, had the privilege to be invited as a guest on Comcast Newsmakers. During an interview hosted by Comcast's Jill Horner, Dr. Locke talked about the importance of early childhood education for all children, regardless of income, developmental delays, or learning differences. You can watch the interview at comcastnewsmakers.com, and you can do a search for the early childhood. We talked about in prior meetings, but we didn't talk about the Percy one. There's sensory story time at the libraries, and there is one at Percy, the first 3 Mondays of every month from 11:30 to 12:30, we have one in Percy, and the first 3 Tuesdays of every month, there's one in Quakertown from 10:30 to 11:30. And last but not least, the Bucks County Intermediate Unit was honored to have been awarded PA Smart Advancing grants in the amount of $900,000 to expand computer science and STEM education. The first grant is for $412,656, and it will support the creation of a mobile fab lab and related educational programs. The Mobile Fab Lab will serve as a platform for learning and innovation, a place to play, to create, to learn, and to invent by providing students with project-based, hands-on STEM education. The Mobile Fab Lab will travel throughout the county. The second grant, in the amount of $484,689, will fund the Computational Thinking in Action program. This will engage regional teams throughout Pennsylvania to create a middle school introductory course on computer science and a curriculum for an after-school program in robotics and computer science. The next committee report is personnel. Dr. Yarnell?
Thank you. We did have a personnel committee meeting on February 4th. Some of the outcome of that meeting are 2 of the motions tonight, and plus, of course, the discussion about the school police officer position. There is also a motion on the agenda that was not discussed that night about considering tenure recommendations. So the first motion that came from that discussion is the one to approve a new director of transportation to replace Mr. Geiger, who's retiring at the end of the year. And excuse me, I move to approve Jessica Short as the new director of transportation. Her salary will be $83,718, and her effective date as this position is July 1, 2019.
I'll second that.
Okay. Questions or comments from board members? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you. The second motion is to approve new and revised job descriptions. They are for the Communications and Public Relations Coordinator. This is the revision of Mr. Ferry's position as he is retired. And then also for a K-12 Supervisor of Mathematics, Science, Social Studies, and Reading and Language Arts. And those positions are changed in terms of there are currently 6 supervisory positions in those 4 disciplines. That would be reduced under the proposal the administration has made to 4, and the consequent revision of the job descriptions to fit the new positions. So I make that in the form of a motion.
Second.
Questions or comments from board members?
As I mentioned at the committee meeting, I am not going to support this. I will abstain from this motion, not because of the public relations part, but because of the supervisor part. I know that this is part of the upcoming budget discussion. I would prefer to wait until the discussion has happened and to see whether this proposal is accepted. I personally am not in favor of the proposal as provided, and so I will abstain on this particular motion tonight.
Any other comments or questions from board members? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
And I abstain.
Okay, the motion passes 8-0-1.
7-0.
7-0-1, sorry.
Thank you. The third issue is the discussion on the school police officer position. Specifically tonight, there is also a job description for that position. That would be both the school police officer, the SPO, so-called, / director of security. That would be one of the two new positions. The other would be just the school police officer, SPO. The job description is something that was discussed at the committee meeting and is contained here. And I move that this job description be accepted.
Dr. Yell, if it's appropriate, I would ask that we not move on the job description and just hold the discussion.
And that's fine with me.
I think it was confusing because they're not usually posted. I just wanted them publicly so people could see the job description. But I think that we ought to have the discussion, and then if we would need to move on the job description, we could do that next month, if you're comfortable with that.
I would have abstained
Okay.
for the same reason as the previous one, so I'm more than comfortable with that.
Perfect. Is there anything you want to say or do you want me to?
I think you should probably start.
Okay, sure. Great. Thank you. First, I'm going to ask Mr. Miller, our solicitor, just to provide some of the legal background, as there were some questions regarding qualifications and training, and who are these people, and who can you hire, and what do they have to do annually, and those types of requirements. So since those are all specified in the law, which is primarily Act 44, I'm going to ask Mr. Miller to start and give us an overview of some of those things. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Dr. Bolton, and let me also start by thanking the individuals in the audience who previously spoke. Many of you made cogent, clear points. All of you were respectful, and because I get to be the parliamentarian, it's no fun being the parliamentarian. Thank you so much for staying within the time frames. Mr. O'Connor and I believe some other individuals, I wrote their names down, raised questions, I think reasonable questions about who can do what under Act 44. And so let me try to provide some context for everyone. I may or may not answer everyone's questions, but let me do my very best. With the proviso, with the understanding for everyone that the most recent guidance for Act 44 was released by PDE, I think on Friday. So it's very much a fluid situation. But essentially, the world is divided into three things for purposes of security at schools. There are school resource officers, which many people have mentioned, and that's pretty clear and defined in and of itself. That's a law enforcement officer who is employed by a municipality, who is co-located in a school and operates by virtue of their existing law enforcement powers through a cooperative arrangement with a school district. That's the school resource officer. There is a school police officer provided for in Act 44. A school police officer is an employee of the school district who has certain powers provided to him or her through court order. And then the third category are school security guards. According to the guidance provided by the Department of Education, guidance which we briefed the board on previously, school security guards are not able to be armed. They are not permitted to carry weapons under the provisions of Act 44. They may be school police officers if they're hired into that capacity, but they are not, by virtue of their position as security guards, permitted to carry weapons. Let me go back to the category which seems to have attracted the most comment. That's school police officer. School police officer under the statute, and I'm sorry, I have my cheat sheet, and I also apologize, my daughters put that sticker on the back of my computer, and they're all in trouble for doing that. But that is a law enforcement officer who's employed by a school district. And they come in kind of two circumstances. One is either an employee of the school entity directly, or the school entity may contract with retired federal agents or retired state, municipal, or military police officers or sheriffs to provide services. Those individuals who are the independent contractors must undergo what's known as MOPEC training. That's Municipal Police Officers Education and Training Commission, located in Hershey, Pennsylvania, across from Hershey Park, in case you're wondering. And they are the entity which license municipal police officers across the state. They license what's known as Act 120 training. It is the card which allows someone to act as a municipal police officer and gives them police powers. Anybody who is hired as an independent contractor has to undergo annual training by MOPEC. Any individual who is hired by an SPO must take an oath, must wear a shield, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and upon appropriate motion to a judge of the Court of Common Pleas within the county, within the school district is located, a school police officer has the power, if the judge signs off on it, and lots of judges will decide what they want to do, gives the SPO the power to arrest, the authority to issue citations, the authority to detain students until the arrival of local law enforcement or any combination therein. A school police officer under Act 44 has the power to enforce good order in school buildings, school buses, school grounds, et cetera, et cetera. And if authorized by the court, in other words, if signed off by the court, have the powers exercised by the authority of law or ordinance of the police of the municipality, and to issue summary citations. In other words, they have the ability to act as police officers on school grounds. That's where their jurisdiction is enforceable. In order to carry a firearm as a school police officer under the current version of Act 44, you must have completed MOPEC training, i.e. police officer training, i.e. Act 120 certification, or have graduated from the Pennsylvania State Police Academy and been employed as a state trooper and separated service in good standing prior to being able to carry a weapon on school grounds. And so, to the question, I think the reasonable question raised by many people, are there standards? There are certainly standards, and they are enumerated in the law, which we are bound to follow. Will those standards stay static? I highly doubt it. I mean, I think PD will continue to provide guidance on that circumstance, but MOPEC training does have a specific firearms training component, as many individuals have remarked upon, and so whatever policy decision the board makes, we are bound to incorporate those requirements already set forth in Act 44 before we provide somebody with a weapon who can carry it on school grounds if that person is not already a law enforcement officer for another municipality. And so two small takeaways, and then before Dr. Bolton gongs me. Two quick takeaways. One is anybody who is going to exercise police powers on school property must be approved by a judge of the Court of Common Pleas before they do that. There is no magical wand which gets waved and converts somebody into a school police officer absent court approval. Secondly, and more importantly, any person authorized to carry a firearm has to undergo the appropriate amount of training already identified in the law and established either by the Municipal Police Officers Education and Training Commission or the State Police Academy, both of which are relatively rigorous training. Dr. Bolton, I yield my time.
Thanks, Mr. Miller. I do appreciate that. Just one clarifying question, and you may have said it, I may have missed it. So the continuing training requirements for a school police officer versus a Pennridge Regional Police Officer, there would be the same requirements of annual recertifications, whatever the trainings and requirements are for a police officer would be the same as for a school police officer.
While neither PDE or Act 44 is definitive on that point, it would be my recommendation as solicitor that a person who is authorized to carry a gun will have to go to the 2-year annual recertifications. And quite frankly, I think it ought to be yearly or 6 months, because, of course, it is a skill which must be practiced in order to be done well. So,
Thank you for that clarification. And I do just want to clarify from a training standpoint, obviously, sorry about that. I do want to clarify from a training standpoint that obviously there is a difference between a community police officer and a police officer that would be in schools in terms of the basic clientele and the people that they will be interacting with. So in addition to police officer trainings, things like guns and firearms and restraint and all the things that police officers would be trained in, we also have budgeted an amount for training for things that are specific to school resource officers or school police officers. There are regular trainings that are offered locally. There was one in Doylestown about 3 months ago that was a school resource officer, school police officer training process that was a 2-day training for them to talk about things specific to school settings that would be different. As well as we're going to provide educational training from a standpoint of what's the best way to de-escalate a 16-year-old, because that may be very different from de-escalating a 30-year-old someplace in the city. Things like that. So those trainings will be part of what we will do, and actually we've budgeted money to train all of our security guards in those things. But obviously the school police officers, if approved, would have additional trainings beyond that because of their responsibilities. So I wanted to clarify that from a training standpoint. I also want to thank the community members who came out and the ones who have emailed the board or myself or called us earlier. I do appreciate that. There really were 2 main purposes to put this on the agenda tonight. One was to hear from the community and to give us time to interact with this material, give people a chance to read the job description, hear from each other, and also hear from the board, but also provide some information that we need to based on the history as well as the emails I've received and the comments from tonight. So I want to do that for you. First and foremost, I want to say very clearly and very loudly at the beginning that the number one thing we do is to care for the psychological and the physical safety of our students and our staff. There is not one thing that we do or choose not to do that will fix either of those things. We need to continually and will continue to have the conversations about how do we best address the psychological safety as well as the physical safety of all of our students and all of our staff members. So I don't want to lose in this conversation that what we are talking about is much larger than one issue, and we need to make sure that we don't lose focus of that. I am personally proud, as I've been in Pennridge for 7 months and have studied what has happened with this, to be able to enumerate multiple things in both categories, because they are important to this board, they are important to our teachers, they are important to our parents, and so it's vital that we do that. From a psychological standpoint, we have designed curriculum specific for mental health that we deliver to students in key grade levels. Right? We have increased the number of social workers in the last 2 years that are available to our students. We are in the process of approving a guidance curriculum that will present some of these topics K through 12 to all of our students that is required by law. We've created threat assessment teams. The comprehensive plan has 3 goals. One of them is around the mental and psychological wellness of our students. And so there are multiple steps within the comprehensive plan that deals with that. Rachel's challenge is an example of that, right? We are caring for our community and giving resources and education to our staff, and in this case our parents and our students on very important mental health topics. There are multiple assemblies. Those of you who have students in school know that there are routinely assemblies that talk about being kind, that talk about caring for each other. At different levels, as well as our advisory, our homerooms, our morning meetings, right? We do have teachers who are daily caring for kids. You could all tell me stories of teachers who have cared for your kids, right? And so that is part of what we do on a daily basis. From a physical safety, there are also things that we've done. You know about cameras, you know about entryways, you know about Raptor, you know about the drills we do, you know about the Alice protocol. The SPO and it really was an SRO conversation until about 4 months ago. But the conversation about an armed police officer in the high school has been part of those conversations. It is not a new conversation, and it has been part of that conversation. Actually, the data I found and the history I found, the conversation of an SRO was had with the townships and the police department and the administration before the conversation around Alice drills. So from a timing standpoint, this is not a reaction, right? Now, this is still a reaction culturally, but it's a reaction and a conversation that has been going on for at least 4 years. Which is the data I could find. There is lots of conversation regarding data, right? And I'm a math geek, and I'm a self-proclaimed math geek. And so I will not have a conversation without data and without research. I do want to say and be very clear, it is impossible to track the impact of any one variable when you are talking about a complex topics like physical and psychological safety. There is no way to measure the success of our cameras, right, alone. That doesn't mean they don't add to safety. That doesn't mean I can't tell you stories of the camera helping us, right, generally after the fact, not always before the fact. But that doesn't, it is almost impossible to track the impact of that one change. I do want to give you a sense of the data and the numbers that we routinely track to measure both the psychological and the physical safety of our students. The Pennsylvania Youth Survey is done every other year. It is our best information providing trends on bullying, mental health, and substance abuse. We have student assistant program referrals. These are primarily students with mental health or substance abuse concerns. We track that data on a regular monthly basis. Our annual State Safe Schools report is where any serious item like a threat, a fight, a drug offense, a weapon, those serious attacks would be enumerated there. There are some that we're required to make public and we send to the state, and you can review those. All other discipline numbers we do review. So we do look at school discipline numbers monthly. That is generally where bullying is enumerated. So for us to look at patterns in grade levels, boy versus girl, minorities, high school. And so we look at those on a monthly basis for trends. We look at crisis referrals. Thanks to Dr. Wyerker's office, we are now tracking all crisis referrals to look for patterns of students who are struggling with mental health and serious threat of harm either to themselves or someone else. That is a new system we put in place in the last 12 months. In addition to that, we will track items like Rachel's Challenge. Right? There will be teams of people who are putting things in place as a result of that presentation to help impact their buildings. Will it be possible for me a year from now to tell you exactly the impact of those? No, I cannot. Right? I will be able to tell you anecdotal data. I may be able to tell you specific data regarding a reduction in bullying. Whether that one presentation was the reason or not, it would be impossible for me to be able to tell you. Right? So I do want to be careful when we talk about data from that standpoint. I want to give you an overview from a history in terms of what I found out in terms of this conversation and clarify a couple things that I've heard in the community that are not quite right in terms of the time frame. This began, as I could find, in the 15-16 school year. In the fall, there was conversations with the administration, Pennridge Regional Police Officer, township officials, Souderton, and Quakertown, because they at the time had a school police officer model and a school resource officer model. So the conversation began as to what were those two models and what might that look like in Pennridge. And the conversation with the township was not only the concept, but also what would funding options possibly look like. In most areas, if there is a school resource officer, there is a split of funding, not always. Sometimes it's grant funded, and so the municipality can cover it all, or the school district can cover it all. But generally, there's some sort of split that has to do with what percentage you pay and what percentage you pay, who pays for the car, and those types of things when we're talking about school police officers. In the 16-17 school year, there was a decision made to first implement the ALICE protocols and to consider an SOR the following school year. That decision was made in the fall of 16 during the 16-17 school year. During the 17-18 school year, there was an official survey done in the fall of all Bucks County schools. They found at that time, and is also current, that 7 of the 12 other school districts in Bucks County currently have at least one SPO or SRO, as well as Souderton as North Penn. And I've learned from a national standpoint that 70% of all high schools nationally have at least a part-time school resource officer or school police officer assigned to their buildings. Then in the spring of that year was when the district made their final recommendation and added this item to the budget. So that was done. It began in February. There was a board meeting that was pretty recent after the Parkland shooting. It was obviously a very emotional board meeting, and there were lots of people, and it was in some ways the exact opposite of this public comment because of the time and the date, and that there were many people who were saying, we need to do something. This cannot happen here, right? And so there was the reaction to that in February, and that was the spring, February of 18. There was then a community safety forum in April of 18 where lots of topics were discussed. One of them was a school resource officer that was mentioned during that community forum. Was attended by about 100 family members, family community members and school district employees. In the April Finance Committee, the first mention of the money piece of an SRO was mentioned. The cost estimate was that the district portion would be approximately $100,000. There was no formal commitment from the community, the township, in terms of what the percentage would be, but the conversation was somewhere around 75-25, 80-20, and so $100,000 was set as the round number for the cost of an of an SRO, and that was at the April Finance Committee. In the May board presentation, the budget was presented, and that $100,000 was put in the budget for the 18-19 school year. So at that time, the formal recommendation from the administration was to implement an SRO at Pennridge High School for the 18-19 school year, the school year that we're in, and $100,000 was put into the budget. That budget was approved with public comment in June. So there were 5 times during the spring of 18 where this item was discussed and budgeted and put into for the 18-19 school year. Okay. And so for the 18-19 school year, the current budget does include $100,000 for an SRO. Because of the transition of my position in August, that position was not filled. I should say there were 2 reasons. One is partly my fault because I came in August. The other one was the fact that the township conversation was not finalized, and so there was no determination of what the money would actually be. And so there was no one hired because there was no idea of who would pay what percentage for the person and what they would make, since they would be a Pennridge Regional Police Officer, since it was an SRO at the time. There have, through all of this, been multiple conversations with the cabinet, with the board, with Chief Blake, with other police officers, but generally with Chief Blake, as well as the other districts who have been vital in helping us to define our model. As I went through making my personnel recommendations, the board asked me over the first 6 months to look at personnel across the district. This was one of the items to look at because it was in the budget. When I looked at it and talked to the cabinet and looked at recommendations, our recommendation was to be able to meet the request of an SRO and the duties of an SRO was to recommend school police officers instead. A couple reasons for that. One, because they would do, and it would not be in addition to security guards, and I'll get to that in just a second. It would be a cheaper option. It would allow us to fund it ourselves, and we could do 2 of them for far cheaper than the $100,000 that was budgeted for one police officer or a school resource officer. The other one is, anyone who's in education knows that the single most important thing for an employee is their relationships with the people that they are working with and that they are responsible for. Our school security guards are responsible for those relationships and are the front line with the kids. And so the recommendation to make 2 of our full-time security guards, and I want to qualify, it may not be the people, and I'll get to that in just a second, but to have 2 of our security guard positions also serve as school police officers will allow us to continue to focus on the relationships like a security guard should, as well as then have the aspects of a school police officer in the building, or 2 school police officers. It will also allow us to cover more hours with a school police officer than having 1, right? 2 can work more hours than 1 can from that standpoint. I want to give you a sense in terms of the costs. It was reported in the paper that the school police officers would cost $83,000. That's not accurate because that also includes an additional part-time 5-hour security guard. And so as part of the presentation and my recommendation, we currently have 3 full-time and 2 part-time security guards. They cover the hours from 6:30 a.m. to about 10, 11 o'clock at night, depending on activities. So we have 3 full-time, 2 part-time. Our recommendation from the administration to the board is to keep 3 full-time, but make 2 of them school police officers, and add a 3rd part-time to the current 2 part-times. So the only change in hours is increasing 5 hours of coverage, but 2 of the current full-time would become school police officers. We have many current security guards who qualify under the letter of Act 44, and I hope that they will apply. That does not mean they will get the positions. And so our contracts do speak to what happens if a person's in a position and someone else gets their job and there are bumping and demotions, and we have contracts to control that. If that were to happen, if we were to bring in outside people, which may or may not happen, I do not know who will apply for the job, and if we move forward, we'll put together a team to interview and evaluate from that standpoint. We are not adding 2 on top of. That is primarily a budget decision at this time. The budget currently has $100,000 in it. You'll also see me quoting that this technically saves $17,000. The only reason it saves $17,000 is because the additional costs for the 2 school resource officers, which is $58,540 if you include everything, as well as the additional part-time security guard, which is just over $24,000, those 2 numbers add to $83,000. We have already budgeted $100,000, so there's already $100,000 sitting in the budget. If you move that budget money, which is one of the ways that you budget, you just keep positions moving on, like your 4th grade math teacher stays a 4th grade math teacher the next year, they stay in the budget, you don't reallocate the money, that $100,000 is there. So that extra, and I'll put that in quotes, $17,000 could be used elsewhere in the budget. And so it still costs $83,000, but it is not new money, it is currently budgeted money that could be incorporated into next year's budget. So I just wanted to clarify that in terms of how could it cost $83,000 and be $17,000 cheaper from that standpoint. If you were to look at the job description, and if you have not, I would encourage you to, because it does give you a good indication of what this man or woman or these men and women would do. I first want to clarify why there are 2 of them. Their titles would be different. The job description actually has both positions on it. The job description talks about a school police officer / director of security. That would be one position. That person would technically be, we won't use the word chief, but they will be in charge of our security force. So any security issues as well as trainings for new teachers in our ALICE program and doing things at the middle school and the elementary school would fall on his or her shoulders. There then is also then a school police officer who doesn't have the supervision aspects, but does have the police aspects of the position. And so if you look at the job, when you have a chance to look at the job description, there are 20 duties and responsibilities that both of these men or women will fulfill. Some of them read just like a security guard. These people will still do lunch duty, they will still help kids at the bus, they will still be there when they come in the morning, they'll still be in all those large spaces, because that's where we know adults need to be with kids, both from a monitoring standpoint, but also for a care standpoint. And so that's where they will be. They'll still be out parking cars, they'll still be dealing with buses, they'll do all the things that security guards do. They then have some of their job description that you look at and say, ooh, that's not a security guard. Those are the police officer responsibilities. When you talk about liaison with juvenile probation, those types of things that are important when you're talking about the legal system that a police officer could benefit Pennridge. Then there are, I believe 5, yes, there are 5 additional responsibilities that are simply the director of security. So that person has an additional stipend to do 5 additional things. And you read those. Those are very supervision, coordination of training, extra planning in the summer. Both of these people would work additional days than they currently do. Currently, our security guards work student days, which makes sense. They work 181 days a year. That's how many days our students come to school. These positions would work additional days so that we had summer trainings, we had opportunities for them to help with the sports teams, some of those things that happen in the summer that would be helpful for these positions to be able to do. So there are some extra responsibilities to be covered during those days. There's been conversation around the research and the concerns. I can guarantee you, but I will not bore you, that I have read the 7 I can find. I've also read the Congregational Research Services Report, which is basically the research arm of the government that says, tell us about XYZ. Well, they had one on school police officers that was done on data off the 15-16 school year, which is where most of the actual data can come from. People talk about, like, how many incidents have they been, how many times does a gun help, does it prevent? Well, they can't measure prevention, right? There have been since Columbine in '99, there have been 197 school day shootings. In 3 of those 197, there was an armed school police officer or school resource officer who intervened. In one case, they killed the perpetrator. In the other 2, they stopped it by making the perpetrator flee. Right? There were some casualties in those. I could not find for the life of me how many of the other 194, because that's the question a math geek's asking. I do not know of the other 194 how many of them had a school police officer or a resource officer on campus. I could, because it's not all of them, because it's only 70% of the high schools have one. So there are going to be some instances where there wasn't somebody there. But we all know instances where there was somebody there and they didn't end it, right? Because I know that that's part of the conversation that we have. So that data is out there. There are 3 things that the research shows, right? And I just want to do another warning in terms of research, because every one of these research studies, no matter what side of this issue you're on, you can find a research study to support you, but every one of them will say, we have a very small sample size, there is very little research done in this area, and there are a ton of multiple confounding variables, so it is impossible to predict which one of these things impacted that. And all of the studies will say that to some sense. Now, there are pieces of the studies where people have concerns that they've measured. One is increased criminalization. I know it's a conversation we've had on the board in some executive sessions, but also publicly, about you bring a police officer into the school day to day, more kids are going to get arrested. Because where a security guard might say, knock it off, a police officer might throw them up against the wall and handcuff them. I shouldn't have been that graphic, I apologize. They would arrest them, right? Because it could turn into something more than you're just, you're being a brat. And so there have been studies done on that, right? And there are studies that will show that from a poverty standpoint, there may be some truth there, and they're further studying that. If you factor out poverty, and so if you don't look at poor schools with high SES, which fortunately Pennridge did not qualify, there is no indication that there's criminalization, that the numbers are any higher. There is indication that the things students are arrested for are less serious. And so there are roughly the same number of arrests, but where police officers from the outside would charge assault, a school police officer charges disorderly conduct. And so it's not like there are fewer charges. I'm not suggesting that, right? There are some studies that even show a little tick up of charges, but nothing statistically significant in the studies yet. Although, again, they are continuing to do this. There's also a question about the increase in exclusions. Are more students suspended or expelled? Currently, there is no indication that that's true, but that is data we track monthly. And that would be data with something, if this were to be approved, that is that significant that we would track that monthly. We would know whether all of a sudden at the high school we have a 20% increase in suspensions, and who is suspending and what caused it, and those types of things. We would have to. As well as there is some research done in terms of disproportionate discipline for minorities. This is not just true in the SPO situation, but it is also true in the SRO SPO situation. So it is something that we are not a largely diverse population at the high school, but we do have diversity across our community, and it is another piece that we would need to measure. We measure that currently in terms of suspensions as well as discipline referrals. We do track that information to see whether we are being disproportionate to boys over girls, to minorities over non-minorities. So that is information that we would need to track specific to an SPO or an SRO. Dr. Yonell, that's all I have.
Dr. Bolton, I want to thank you for laying out as much information as you have. I think we've done, or you've done, I shouldn't take any credit for it, that you've done a much better job this go-round than actually at the February 4th meeting, where I think we discussed the issue but didn't have nearly as much in-depth background, including the cost, but also the research part of this effort or interest. So I certainly appreciate that. It's given me more information to think about and work with for sure. And I know I had already asked you about the breakout of the costs because I was confused by it. And once I talked to people in the community, I think some of them, and I believe our first student, Ms. Watson, did a better job than I did of dissecting this and figuring out what exactly we were doing in terms of the number of personnel. I credit and thank her for that. I think that's wonderful that you pulled that out. I guess that's the characteristic, the thumbprint of a good reporter. So thank you so much. Certainly I am concerned because I think this is in many ways a very emotional issue, both sides. Whichever side you favor, it tends to be emotionally supported by you. I'm sure some of it's rational, but from what you've said, in terms of the research data, 197 incidents is certainly horrific from a human tragedy standpoint. 197 incidents in 13,000 some odd school districts is statistically insignificant. Nobody wants to hear that, I'm sure, but to me, that's exactly where it stands, and that makes this decision for me much harder in the sense that, can I justify going forward making this what I consider a big leap in terms of our emphasis on security and what we're doing with security versus what we do now, or versus keeping 2 security guards that we already have, or 2 different security guards, whatever we choose, and adding additional personnel. And in fact, under this budget umbrella, we could add another full-time security guard in lieu of the 2 converted, if that's the right word, that's the word I've been using, converted security guards that would become SPOs. So it's a lot to think about. So that's where I'm standing. I'm trying to listen to what other people have to say at this point. And it has been a long discussion. I think it's been a long discussion because there are different points of view, and they're significantly different points of view. Do other people want to comment at this point on the board?
I think, Mr. Miller, you might have answered my question, but when you were saying about the training, can a school district, if you hire the police officer, is the school district able to exceed the required training?
Yes.
All right, and then the judge grants the powers to this individual or individuals. Is the school district able, does the school district have any power to say, to define the limits to what we would want someone to be able to?
The SP, the school police officer, would be an employee of the school district, unlike an SRO, who is an employee co-located in the building, but an employee of a municipal police force. And so, as Dr. Bolton pointed out, with several of the school districts that we represent, several of the municipalities we represent, there's an ongoing conversation over the manner in which police powers are exercised in a school building, right? And Dr. Bolton, I think, pointed to several examples that are always subject to discussion between an outside entity and the school district in terms of does that police officer get involved in rumors? Does that police officer an extra principal or a police officer, and so on and so forth? Because a school police officer is an employee of the school district would have a greater span of control, shall we say. Whenever we have agreements with municipalities to provide an SRO, it's made very clear in those agreements that the final decision with regard to the exercise of police powers is with the municipality, not the school district. And that can sometimes lead to some difficult conversations depending on the SRO who's assigned and so on and so forth. So all of the things that this board has been discussing and Dr. Bolton raised with regard to the need to find the right balance, that's all part of the discussion we've had in several other places.
Dr. Young, I apologize. I looked at my notes and I found one thing that I didn't mention that I went through, so I apologize. I did cold call 5 high school principals. It was a convenient sample because they were 5 high school principals I know that all had either a school resource officer or a school police officer, simply because I felt like they'd tell me the truth because I knew them. And simply asked them 2 questions. First I said is, if you were starting your own high school, would you have one? And all 5 of them said yes. So these are people who are using them as high school principals and said that they would continue to utilize. One of them said, not the one I have hired, right? But I won't tell you who that was. But they still would do the position, they just didn't have the right person. And I said to them, what would you then say to people who don't think it's a good idea, right? And all 5 of them said some level of relationships. And the only comment I wrote down that I wanted to say out loud because it was one that I had not thought of, one of them said that the biggest impact we've had with our SRO through relationships is the number of things, not tragic things, not mass shootings, that our SRO has intervened in students' lives to help the kid and stop something, whether that be a fight brewing, whether that be a weekend plan, whether it be, because when that person's trusted, then students start coming up and saying, hey, I want to tell you. Right, it's like a trusted teacher. They learn a lot more than the teachers that aren't trusted because the kids come up and tell them things like that. So I did want to pass along that. Again, small sample size, very convenient, but it was impactful for me, so I did want to share.
One additional comment that I will make, and again, probably Ms. Watson has this all figured out, but I did want to comment that I certainly cannot and would not speak for the Pennridge Regional Police Department, but I do believe that in the conversations over the last number of years that they have definitely supported, and in particular, they have supported an SRO, which was the initial conversation. Now, there's a good reason for that. Obviously, our police forces are stretched somewhat thin, and they have to allocate resources anytime they come to the high school or any of our schools. Some of those are just friendly visits, which is great. Not all of them are. Unfortunately, there's not much you can do about that other than deal with the issue as it comes up. The $100,000, as Dr. Bolton alluded to, was allocated because there had not been a decision about the split between what Pennridge Regional would pay versus what the Pennridge School District would pay. It should be noted, it's implied but not clearly stated in my view, that the Pennridge Regional SRO, if that was would be a direction that we went, would be a full-time police officer. He would serve in the schools for whatever he or she, for whatever the number of days is, say it's 191, 10 days beyond and the rest of the time, and maybe some of the time during the day even, he would serve Pennridge Regional. Hence the much higher figure than the two school police officers that are being proposed here, who are truly, although we call them full-time, they're only full-time in the sense that they work 191 days, as do other full-time teachers, for instance. They don't work a full year, they work a full school year. And that does make a difference, obviously, in what kind of salary people can command, depending on the position. But I think that's something that's kind of folded in here, and people may not be aware of, but they should be aware of, because those costs, that hasn't been the focus of tonight's conversation, those costs do have an impact on the budget. Any other comments? Okay. I would recommend that those who haven't seen it, it is in the agenda tonight, look at this description. As I said, I would have abstained from it. It does not mean, abstaining does not mean that I object to what's in the description. It's that I haven't, as I say, I haven't been at the point where I'm sure that this is something that we should have or are going to have, and I think that in a way it's a little bit of the cart getting before the horse. So that was my logic there. So we have one more item on the agenda tonight for the Personnel Committee, and that is the approval. This is a good news item, I think, normally. This is a motion to approve tenure recommendations for Laura White from Bedminster Elementary and Marissa Bell from West Rock Elementary, two of our teachers who have been here 3 years and have successfully completed and been chosen to move forward with their tenure due to their support and skills in the classroom. So I move that we approve those two tenure recommendations.
Second. Questions or comments from board members? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you. Lastly, we do have another Personnel Committee meeting scheduled. It will be Monday, March 4th, 2019, so it will be a week from tonight. And this discussion about the potential hiring of the SRO, the SPOs, really SPO discussion will continue that night. Thank you for listening to this conversation. Thank you.
Next up is policy. Ms. Caleri.
The policy committee did not meet in the month of February. The next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 5th.
Thank you.
Monday, March 4th.
March 4th.
We gave you the wrong dates.
Okay, yeah, it says the 5th, but it isn't. Okay, technology, Mr. Rice.
All right, thank you. Never fear, technology is finally here. I said it, I'm a dork, but that's what I'm just going to stick with. I'm sticking with it, Doug. You are now, sorry. We had a great committee meeting for the first one of the year. We had an awesome presentation by two of our technology guys at on our technology team, Mr. Dan Alexander and James Riley. Did a great job showing us Land School classroom management software. It enables the teachers to see what the kids are doing on their laptops while they're in a classroom. It also allows them the ability to control and blank out their screens so they can get a little more heads-up time and presentation time where they can actually pay attention. There's a lot of great pieces. If you didn't see the technology committee meeting, I would recommend seeing the video. It's awesome. They did a great job with the presentation. There's a lot of positives with that. It's specific to Lenovo. We get it free for a year, but they're going to do a little bit more research. We have a couple more questions as far as which one we're going to actually possibly pilot on a small subset to roll out to the teachers. And I think it's an awesome tool for the teachers. I asked that the technology team would make it easy for the teachers so that they're willing to use it, and it's actually pretty simple. I saw it twice, and I liked the presentation, so just an FYI. There was a couple other things that we talked about, one-to-one for the 6th graders at the middle school, the sleeve for the 6th grade laptops at the middle 6th graders, and whether to decide if we're going to self-insure or continue the current recommendations for insurance for the laptops. Those still need further conversation, which they will be discussed in the March 4th committee meeting. And that's all. Thank you.
March 4th is going to be a long night. Okay, the next committee report is for the Upper Bucks County Technical School. Mrs. Dolan could not make it tonight. Unfortunately, her power is out, and she is dealing with that over in Bedminster. But she did send me her report, so I'm going to share that for you. The Upper Bucks County Technical School met on Thursday, February 21st. 47 new inductees into the National Technical Honor Society, and the event was held on February 11th for the induction. There were donations, numerous sponsors for the new food truck, as well as Montgomeryville Cycle Center, a 2005 Kawasaki Ninja to small engines, Hart Mechanical 304 stainless steel strips for TIG welding. Kirsten Phillips, a homeschool student from who resides in Pennridge, was recognized. She's a culinary arts student. She was the most outstanding level 1, 2, and 3 student. She took the top spot at the Skills USA Culinary Challenge as a sophomore. She plans to attend Bucks County Community College for hotel restaurant management. The JOC approved the operating budget for the 1920 school year. This year, the budget was produced by our business manager as well as a cooperative effort from the 3 sending schools, business managers, the business manager, and Mr. Sweda will be presenting the budget to the Finance Committee. Amber's Meals, we already talked about that, and the flyers are up at the front. So, keep that in mind for St. Patrick's Day and for the Easter Bunny. And a public auction is being held on March 16th at 9 a.m. and information is on the website. I believe the auction has to do with the old cabinet making, that they are auctioning off all of the equipment from that course since it's no longer there. The next Upper Bucks County Technical School Board meeting is scheduled for Thursday, March 21st, 2019. And the next committee report is Act 48. Mrs. Walters?
Thank you. I just want to piggyback off the tech school. They also do grooming services for your dogs. And I picked my dog up there today, $16. And they bathed my dog and brushed him. I have no time for taking care of my dog. It's all meetings and children for me. So I just wanted to give that little plug that the director, Caitlin Donka of Animal Services over at the tech school, somebody you can email to see what you can get your dog cleaned up. So that's my plug. The Act 48 committee did not meet in the month of February, and our next meeting is Thursday, March 14th.
Thank you. The Pennridge Area Coordinating Committee, Ms. Thompson?
Pennridge area, can you hear me? I got it down. The Pennridge Area Coordinating Committee, the PAC committee, met on January 24th for approximately 1 hour and 10 minutes